The woke media mob is once again coming for Tucker Carlson, demanding his show be removed from the air and that anyone who sponsors his show face a boycott. Look, this isn't the first time it's happened, and it won't be the last. We have had the CNN media team relentlessly harping about Fox News. It's all they really talk about, probably because there's nothing else to talk about. So I don't find this attack to be all that genuine. I just think that with Trump out of office, the media is desperate, and I've got other articles to prove it. In a hilarious article from The Atlantic, they're saying, I miss Trump. No joke. They're saying they miss Trump. But anyway, more to the breaking news and what the results are going to be. Tucker Carlson ran a segment about the Capitol riots. In it, he referenced how the left was rioting as well, with Black Lives Matter and Antifa rioting for months following the death of George Floyd. In the segment, Tucker Carlson claimed that the reported cause of death was a carefully concocted myth and purports that, in fact, George Floyd died of a fentanyl overdose. What's true? George Floyd did, according to court documents, have a lethal amount of fentanyl in his system. However, the official reporting is that his death was due to neck compression and it was ruled a homicide. This is Tucker Carlson's opinion. It's an opinion show. Whether he should be on the air, that's not entirely up to me, is it? I can certainly express my opinions. I don't agree with Tucker Carlson's assessment, but I do think it needs to be taken into consideration because we want to avoid politicizing what's really going on. And if you want to understand this world, then you would likely need to see the source material that Tucker Carlson is in fact citing. Based on court documents presented about the amount of fentanyl George Floyd had in his system, Tucker Carlson has presented his opinion, which I think is valid. For political reasons, I think many people are saying it's not true and he's lying because they want to get him taken off the air. I'm not entirely convinced they really care about Tucker Carlson, though. I actually think they love the man and they love Trump. There's an article from The Atlantic, as I just mentioned, called I Miss the Trump Days and I Was the Enemy of the People. They changed the title. They need a boogeyman, and Tucker is perfect for them. He can say something that they will deem to be controversial, but is backed up by some facts, albeit Tucker's opinion is not the opinion of a medical examiner, so take it for what it's worth. But it gives them something to complain about. If Tucker actually got banned, well, that would be pretty bad for them. So you know who did get banned? Project Veritas. They have been completely suspended from Twitter, and not just temporarily. It looks like their account has been completely removed. Why? We can see the difference in the censorship play. No large outcry demanding a news outlet be permanently removed like they're doing to Tucker Carlson. Why? Well, Tucker's an opinion guy who gives the left a boogeyman. With Trump gone, they've got something to complain about. Project Veritas just does undercover reporting. You can't really complain about the opinions around a live video, or I should say a video recording of some executive at some company saying something damning. Real journalism versus Tucker's opinions. Now, don't get me wrong, Tucker has done a lot of legit journalism, but his opinions are his opinions. So they'll call for him to be banned, and then he doesn't get banned. Project Veritas releases hard facts and video and information. They'll claim it's manipulative, it's deceptively edited. Sorry, many prominent news organizations do the exact same thing. You don't complain about that. That's the issue. Veritas had to be removed because it was a real threat. Tucker is great, in my opinion, when he's giving his opinion and expressing his thoughts and giving a voice to many people who feel like they don't have an outlet. But the machine loves him. It's their opportunity for the boogeyman. Granted, I do think they want to destroy Tucker's show and they hate Fox News. But I think as much as they complained about Trump, as I mentioned, they really did love the man and they're becoming scared and desperate. So let's go through this. We have a lot of information around censorship and the results of this psychotic behavior. And we'll break down what Tucker Carlson really said. You know, I'll add this. I think Tucker Carlson masterfully played these people because now they're going to have to pull up the source material and actually ask questions about George Floyd and the medical reports. I think politics could play a role in this, which is why it's not my position to tell you how George Floyd died, other than the official reporting is that it was due to the police actions. There is a report related to fentanyl. You can figure out what you think. Tucker's certainly given his opinion. And now because of what Tucker has said, the left is propping up that narrative. People don't seem to understand this. Just because you say something isn't true doesn't mean people believe what you say. You've just presented the information to them, and now they'll decide for themselves. Before we get started, however, head over to timcast.com and become a member so you can get access to our exclusive censorship-free, for the most part, to be honest, members-only content. We do say things that you typically can't say on mainstream social media because we'll get banned. And we have a new post from Matt Brainerd discussing his report on illegal ballots in Georgia, and he gives his opinion on what they've discovered. It's a very interesting segment you can get access to on timcast.com. Now, I'll be honest with you. We put it there because this is the kind of stuff that YouTube bans you for, and there's not a whole lot we can do. As we expand the website, we will have more content be free, very important issues. But if you want to support the show and allow us to keep doing this work, become a member. That way, if we do get banned because of the things we say on the Timcast IRL, I say we as in the Timcast IRL podcast and the people who work for the company, we'll always be there at timcast.com, at least until that goes belly up as well. But don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Let's see exactly what they're saying about Mr. Tucker Carlson. Vice reports, Tucker Carlson just lied about George Floyd to defend Trump's insurrection. Carlson went full conspiracy theorist, claiming that last summer's Black Lives Matter protests were based on a, quote, carefully concocted myth. Well, let me break this headline for you. Tucker Carlson didn't lie. He gave you his opinion. His opinion is not law, and it could be wrong, but there is data to back up his opinion. I don't think Tucker Carlson is a medical examiner, so I'm not necessarily going to take his opinion at face value, but I will point out the evidence as it stands. Let's read what Vice says. They say on Wednesday night, far-right Fox News host Tucker Carlson hit a new low as he tried to defend former President Donald Trump's actions to incite violence at the Capitol insurrection, lying about how police killed George Floyd. Carlson, a staunch defender of Trump, who has repeatedly downplayed the Capitol riots as political protests that got a little out of hand, told his audience that Floyd died from an overdose rather than the result of police brutality, calling the reports about the 47-year-old's death an utter lie and, quote, carefully concocted myth. Quote, there was no physical evidence that George Floyd was murdered, Carlson said, adding that the autopsy showed that George Floyd almost certainly died of a drug overdose, fentanyl. Carlson's assertions are complete BS. Not only has former police officer Derek Chauvin been charged with secondary murder, but the Hennepin County medical examiner ruled Floyd's death a homicide, citing the cause of death as, quote, cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression. Let me just start by saying, Vice, getting charged with a crime is not evidence of you actually committing that crime. You're innocent until proven guilty, but you are right about the medical examiner. I don't think there's a grand conspiracy, to be completely honest. I think Tucker has his opinion based on the evidence he's seen, and maybe he does think the medical examiner got it wrong. I don't think he's going full conspiracy theorist at all, and I don't think there's a conspiracy theory here anyway. I think there's court documents showing that George Floyd had a lethal amount of fentanyl in his system. It doesn't necessarily mean he would have died from it. I'm not a doctor, okay? Neither are you, neither is Tucker, but the medical examiner is. I can only lean on what the medical examiner is saying, and they bring this information up. But you can think they're wrong, and you're allowed to believe political pressure plays a role. Let's read more. They say a second independent autopsy found Floyd died of asphyxiation from sustained pressure from Chauvin's knee on his neck. In the face of shocking new evidence presented during day 2 of Trump's impeachment. No. Shocking new evidence. I'm not going anywhere near that impeachment garbage. It's a waste of time. They go on to say Carlson was trying to find a way to undermine the Democrats' case. To do this, he portrayed Floyd's murder at the hands of a police officer as something of a false flag event and claimed the impeachment trial was another example of this liberal plot to upend the old order of America. Okay, I'm not going to get too deep into any of that stuff. I'll tell you my opinion. I think the Democrats despise Trump, and I think he's an excellent boogeyman for them to rally the left together. Because without Trump, they don't have anything unifying them. So this is a great opportunity for them to do so. Plus, we know many on the left think words are violence. They're really scared. So, of course, they're going to have a more extreme view relative to conservatives. That's about it, I suppose. I also think it's unfair that we have this double standard where the Black Lives Matter rioters did come out and destroy a ton of stuff, burn down cities, and Democrats literally sought to bail them out. Yet Donald Trump saying peacefully march, well, that's evidence of a crime, I suppose. They go on to say that Carlson took issue with Rep. David Cicilline's portrayal of the rioters as an armed, angry mob. Quote, there are no reports to the rioters that day discharging weapons or threatening anyone with a gun, so what is he talking about? Carlson declared, despite the Capitol Police Union revealing that at least 140 officers were injured, including Officer Brian Sicknick, who lost his life during the attack. Well, let me just stress this. Some of the latest reporting on Officer Sicknick is that they don't believe it was blunt force trauma. They believe that it may have been related to bear spray or some other incident that ultimately resulted in him passing. We don't know for sure. But also, Tucker Carlson specifically said discharging weapons, a gun. Injuries have nothing to do with that. Carlson suggested that Sicknick's death and the subsequent outpouring of grief was part of a coordinated plot by Democrats. I think you're looking too far into advice. People coordinate everything. Literally, the impeachment is a coordinated plot by Democrats. I get it. Saying it that way may be more nefarious than it is, but the Democrats have planned how they will run the impeachment and what they will show to win their case, and that's it. They go on to say, quote, they'd finally found a police officer who served their political uses. Kamala Harris and her husband, for example, arrived to pay their respects, and as they did, they said not one thing about defunding the police, but in fact, the story they told was a lie from beginning to end. Carlson then went even further down the conspiracy rabbit hole, claiming the FBI had paid informers in the ranks of the protesters, and even speculated whether Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi had helped escalate the violence. Carlson then brought the argument around to Floyd's death by baselessly suggesting that just like the insurrection, everything we know about his death was a lie. The question is, why would they lie about this? Carlson speculated. For an answer, think back to last spring. Beginning on Memorial Day, BLM and their sponsors in corporate America completely changed this country. They changed this country more in 5 months than it had changed in the previous 50 years. Carlson concluded his argument by suggesting that the Black Lives Matter protests and the Capitol insurrection were both part of some coordinated campaign by liberals to bring about a shift in power in American politics. Democratic partisans used a carefully concocted myth, a lie, to bum rush America into overturning the old order and handing them much more power. It worked flawlessly. So why wouldn't they do it again? I don't think it's just Democrats who do this. I think it's the corporate establishment. I think it's Republicans as well. I think they hate Trump. But let's get to the nitty gritty here. There are some claims. We have this guy, Jesse Larick. He is co-founder of Accountable Tech, and he's the spokesperson for Hillary Clinton. He said, Tucker Carlson smeared George Floyd tonight, claiming he almost certainly died of a drug overdose. It sickens me that the Floyd family has to endure this depravity, and I hope they sue Tucker and Fox for $3 billion, which is apparently the only thing that changes their behavior. We have the Daily Beast. Tucker Carlson goes full conspiracy theorist, ties insurrection to George Floyd's death. Well, now Tucker Carlson's facing his sponsors, a boycott of his sponsors, and he doesn't have that many left. The left has come before, the leftists have attacked his show before and gotten, I think last time, it was a couple of years ago, like 24 sponsors to bail out. Now, if you watch Tucker Carlson, a lot of the ads are for Fox Nation. Basically what I do when I'm like, hey, thanks for watching, go to timcast.com and become a member. It's basically what Tucker Carlson is now doing because many of his sponsors bailed out. I'd like to show you the story. This is what Tucker Carlson was talking about. New court documents say George Floyd had fatal level of fentanyl in his system. Defense attorney argue drug overdose and pre-existing health conditions cause Floyd's death. This is the defense. This is not the medical examiner. So while Tucker is entitled to his opinion may be wrong. Let's read the story. This goes back to August 26th. They say, new documents filed in the George Floyd case give new information about the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's findings in Floyd's autopsy. Handwritten notes of a law enforcement interview with Dr. Andrew Baker, the Hennepin County Medical Examiner, say Floyd had 11 nanograms per milliliter of fentanyl in his system. If he were found dead at home, alone, and no other apparent causes, this could be acceptable to call an OD. Deaths have been certified with levels of 3, Baker told investigators. In another document, Baker said, that is a fatal level of fentanyl under normal circumstances, and added, I am not saying this killed him. Defense attorneys for the officers have signaled they will argue Floyd died from the drugs and pre-existing health conditions. The new documents say Floyd had a heavy heart and at least one artery was approximately 75% blocked. Dr. Stephen Nelson, chairman of Florida's Medical Examiners Commission, who is not affiliated with the case, reviewed the files and says that doesn't mean the drugs or health condition is what caused Floyd's death. We've all had cases where those kinds of levels come into play. You've got to look at the whole picture. It's one thing to die with something. It's another thing to die from something. Hear, hear, good sir. He's right. I think Tucker Carlson is off on this one. I think there's absolutely reasons to criticize the Democrats and their partisan plays, but I don't believe, look, maybe I'm getting something wrong. You can comment below. While Floyd did have a lot of fentanyl in his system, well, it's hard to know if he died with or from. And the reason I say this is because it's actually an argument conservatives make all the time about COVID. And I think that, look, if you can't accept, I don't know, maybe you're trapped in an echo chamber, because let's be real. If someone dies with COVID and they put it down as a COVID death, we have seen many on the right complain about this, and it has happened. There was one guy who got in a motorcycle crash and he had COVID and they said, mark it as a COVID death. And it's like, whoa, dude, the guy died from a motorcycle crash, right? If George Floyd had fentanyl in the system, but you literally have cops kneeling on his neck for 11 minutes and the medical examiner said that's what caused it, I don't know what else to tell you, man. I don't think there's a grand conspiracy. I think the simple solution tends to be the correct one, and tends to be. While it may have played a role, it's possible he would have survived. Much like with COVID, many of these people who, I hear people say comorbidities and stuff are the real cause. They may have survived with those comorbidities. Now, let me show you something. From NPR, medical examiner's autopsy reveals George Floyd had positive test for coronavirus. Does that mean that George Floyd actually died from COVID? You'll actually hear people argue that would count. Many on the left don't even look into this stuff. And that's led to a very serious problem where people dying with are listed as dying from. In this story from The Conversation, quote, died from or died with COVID-19. We need a transparent approach to counting coronavirus deaths. They say the COVID-19 death toll is reported every day by state and federal governments. These numbers are often used alongside case numbers to assess how public health policies are faring in controlling the pandemic and to gauge the success of various drugs or interventions. There's been confusion, however, over whether reported death stats reflect those who've died from COVID or those who've died with COVID. Often it's hard for medical practitioners to determine which of these categories a death falls into. But the COVID-19 death toll publicized daily on Australian state and territory government websites and reported to the press does not differentiate between the two. It includes all people who've died with COVID in their body. It's unclear if the federal government currently makes this distinction or not. If we're going to sit here and say that we need that distinction because there are too many instances over the past year where people with COVID were listed as dying from COVID, the same thing needs to be said from George Floyd. He died with a lethal dose of fentanyl in his system, but medical examiners have said it was due to the actions of the police. I'm not saying that Tucker Carlson is necessarily wrong because it's an opinion based on legitimate data, but I am saying I personally disagree, and in my opinion, I think he's wrong. So let me clarify. Factually, what can we determine? George Floyd had this in his system. Tucker Carlson, who's not a doctor or a medical examiner, has given his opinion based on this, and I default to the medical examiner, as I often do with the experts. The left is trying to get Tucker Carlson banned. I don't think it's legit. I also think I think it's just the typical outrage as per usual. I also think you have to understand there is potential here for politicizing George Floyd's death in this way. The medical examiner could actually be pressured to ignore the fentanyl and turn it into a social justice issue because basically everybody was angry, and it does happen. That doesn't mean it's definitively proven it did. So listen, I am a man of requiring evidence. There is evidence to suggest it could have played a role, but then we have the medical examiner's statement. If Tucker Carlson has other medical examiners who have issued statements to the contrary, I think it's important to hear. But for the time being, the medical examiner has straight up said, this doesn't mean that he died from fentanyl. We often see people die with and not from. That's important. If you think the medical examiner is lying and you think he's bad at his job, I can respect the opinion in that regard, but I'm not going to go in that direction. Sorry. As for the woke outrage, y'all need to chill, but I get it. It's the grift, right? PolitiFact. We have this. It says bloggers, August 27th. Coroner saying George Floyd died of drug overdose, not police brutality. And they say it is false. The two autopsies conclude his death was a homicide, which means his death was the result of another human. The Hennepin County medical examiner said that Floyd's blood work showed a fatal level of fentanyl, according to court documents, but he didn't say that killed him. I suppose there are people who just don't agree with the medical examiner. You're allowed to. That's on you. Tucker apparently doesn't. The left needs to calm down, constantly rolling for the censorship stuff. I'll tell you why I think this is really happening. Now let's get to the meat and potatoes here, huh? I guess that was kind of the meat and potatoes. But let's get to the ramifications. They're desperate for a boogeyman. Anything Tucker would say, they will use. They've tried taking everything Tucker has ever said and used it against him. My friends, I give you a glorious article from The Atlantic. I miss the thrill of Trump. Without quite meaning to, Trump reminded journalists that their relationship to power should be adversarial. Are you serious, dude? You need to calm down. But boy, does this one get amazing. This guy writes, Covering the administration was thrilling for many journalists in the way that I imagine storming Omaha Beach must have been for a 20-year-old fresh from the plains of Kansas. He hadn't signed up for battle, but there he was, liberating France. France, by the way, is where Trump called American soldiers who'd fallen in combat suckers and losers. And that's not even proven to be true. When this magazine first reported those comments, Trump supporters denounced the Atlantic story as preposterous and offensive, even as outlet after outlet confirmed the reporting. No, they didn't. They failed to realize that the preposterous and the offensive were the twin beacons of the Trump presidency. Journalists were merely going where he led. This was our Omaha Beach. I, for one, would have rather been in Hawaii. Bro. Complaining about the Orange Man in no way is comparable to storming Omaha Beach. It's just the nerve of these people. That's really it, isn't it, though? I miss the thrill of Trump, they write. I miss it. Look at this. I love it. Look at you are doubtlessly annoyed as you read this, whoever you are and whatever you believe. To have been a journalist in the Trump era is to have been annoying to everyone. You got that one right. A few journalists deserved your scorn because they thought their microphones gave them moral, not merely journalistic authority. Reporters did not really need to recite the poetry of Emma Lazarus or question the provenance of a pie baked by Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders. In doing so, they helped no one but themselves. At least you got that one right. He says, journalists frequently found themselves assailed for contradictory reasons. We were at once Trump's enablers and his relentless tormentors. We did not fact check him enough, but also did not let him have his say. Listen, I get it, bro. The left was mad at you when you didn't yell at Trump. The right was mad at you when you did. Sure. The media industry is fractured and broken. That's the point. The Tucker Carlson thing is stupid and nonsensical. I don't care. The guy's got his opinion. Lots of people have opinions, and a lot of people have really dumb ones. And Tucker Carlson is certainly not the worst. Rachel Maddow has espoused so much garbage, I can't keep track of it. You want to complain about Tucker Carlson's opinions? You're allowed to. I just disagreed with him. I disagree with Rachel Maddow when she says her nonsense. I disagree with all of them. I personally happen to think Tucker Carlson tends to do a much better job than the left. In his segment, most of what he was getting across was true, or at least backed up by some data or fact that he bases his opinion on. But people are allowed to have bad opinions, and they're allowed to be stupid. If you think Tucker Carlson was wrong in his opinion, you simply say so, and it's that simple. Instead, they call for an escalation of the censorship. They claim they're the ones storming the beaches of Omaha to free France. Yes, that's right. Trump must be removed and Tucker Carlson must be banned because, they're evil opinions, poorly misinforming people and making them dumb. Listen, if you were going to ban Tucker Carlson over his opinion on George Floyd, then you're going to have to ban basically every single journalist over Russiagate because they were wrong on everything as well. And I called them out for it. I happen to think Tucker Carlson is wrong on this one, but I can understand why he believes what he believes. At the time, during the Russiagate reporting, I said, I'm not convinced, but hey, I understand why these people think so. I met with many prominent journalists and asked them what they thought about Russiagate. And I had some journalists from this magazine, The Atlantic, look at me in the face and say, I think he did it. We've got the evidence, man. Trump really was colluding with Russia. Definitely. Wow, really? Definitely. That's right. I'm like, okay, that's bold. And then it turned out to be nothing. It was fake. It was wrong. I didn't call for them to be fired. They're just playing this stupid game. Unfortunately, it actually leads to real world consequences. When they do this, when they scream this, what do we see? You are opening the door for other countries and nasty people to do exactly this. France recently came out, high-profile individuals in France, and said the woke critical theory culture of America is damaging to their society, and it must be rejected. Why? I don't think any of these woke outrage mob journalists actually care. I don't think they care. I really don't. I think they're feigning outrage for the sake of pandering to their tribe. They'll accuse me of the same thing. But dude, I literally just said I thought Tucker Carlson was wrong. Okay, I'm not here to defend the guy. I'm here to actually fact check the guy and say I disagree with his assessment. I understand why he said it like I said. And I think y'all are calling for a boycott and feigning this outrage is ridiculous. You know what they should have said? Very calmly and simply, actually, they should be saying what I'm saying. They wouldn't need to, there would be no reason for criticizing these outlets If they simply just said, Tucker Carlson is basing his opinion off of this report. However, the medical examiner disagreed. Tucker Carlson is not a medical examiner. End of story. Can we move on? I don't think these people voicing their opinion should be banned any more than Tucker Carlson should be. But what they're doing, like I said, has real world consequences. This ridiculous article. Take a look at this story. The BBC is now banned in China 1 week after CGTN's license withdrawn in the UK. It's more of a tit for tat. I don't think it's necessarily the fault of woke journalists. I'm not trying to draw a complete correlation. I'm just saying, when you start espousing the censorship, outrage culture, then you open the door for other countries to do the same thing to the outlets you do like. Now, China has their reason for banning the BBC, their CGTN's license withdrawn in the UK. So that's more of a tit for tat, not related to this. But how many times does there need to be a story about the left getting banned? Because recently we just saw a bunch of progressive YouTubers banned before the left realizes they are setting themselves on fire. You know what? I think I can actually answer this one for you, and I can tell you the truth. Well, in my opinion, at least. Progressive YouTubers, they were stripped from their partner program. Some were censored. And the left and many and leftist media will claim, oh no, it's such a bad thing. In reality, the journalists at the Daily Beast and Vice and these other outlets that are calling for Tucker's figurative head, they're probably cheering that progressives are getting banned. Listen, it's one thing if I compete with Vice or the Daily Beast, but I don't hold the same opinions as them. So they'll retain their leftist market, and they're not going to convince moderates, disaffected liberals, or conservatives to watch them. The bigger problem is progressive independent channels, because then you actually start pulling people away. Now, that is a big problem. So, of course, they will never speak out in defense, legitimately, of the progressives who are getting banned. Look, there are some legitimate progressives who work at these outlets, don't get me wrong, and they probably will, but I'm saying ultimately, these organizations are happy we all will get censored, regardless of if you're left, right, whatever. Less competition, better for them. Now, I'll tell you the real worrying ramifications in this one. It's this story. Breaking 911 says Twitter has locked both James O'Keefe and Project Veritas out of their accounts for violating our rules against posting private information, which escalated. Project Veritas is now suspended. Gone. Tucker Carlson gave an opinion. It was based on the medical examiner's report, but the medical examiner didn't conclude what Tucker Carlson thinks. Let's have a debate about it. Let's ask Tucker Carlson why he thinks what he thinks, and that's it. Getting that debate in front of his audience is the best way to actually challenge an idea you think is wrong. Project Veritas actually put out legitimate information that was threatening to the powers that be. So they've nuked Project Veritas. There was no big question. There was no outrage campaign. Just one day, Project Veritas was banned. They couldn't have the campaign. What would they complain about? Project Veritas is putting out misinformation. What's the misinformation? Literally, it's just a video of someone talking. Well, it's out of context. Sure. Doesn't the mainstream media do the same thing all day, every day? Isn't basically every interview that's ever been edited in any way misleading or out of context? People don't realize this. When I go and sit down with an interview, or when I would, with these big networks, I did an interview with Time Magazine. They didn't press record and say, Tim, tell us what you want to say. They asked me questions. They then edited those answers to questions they ask later. Let me break it down for you. We've done this at Vice. I've done this before. You sit down with someone and you say, tell me about your life. Tell me about your job. What do you do? And then the producer will say, once the recording's done, they'll say, okay, Tim, can you ask these questions? They'll have a sit-in or a stand-in or even nobody. So let me start over. I'll be sitting in front of the interview, the subject, right? Maybe it's a guy who builds igloos, and we want to learn about igloos. I'll sit down in front of him and say, tell me about building igloos. Say whatever you want to say. They'll talk for a long time. Then that person says thank you and leaves. I then stare at an empty chair and they'll say, okay, Tim, ask these questions. And I'll go, but how do you make the igloo? But how do you lift the heavy blocks of ice? How do you carve the ice? The goal is you have now this fake conversation they edit together. That's how the media operates. And they would accuse me or these independent channels of being the fake news. They've always done this. So when you think you're getting a conversation, it's like the journalist will ask a question. What is your favorite food? And then the person goes, well, I just happen to really like pad thai. That's not a real interview. The questions were asked later. They were edited. And you might actually have Here's my favorite part is the out of context stuff where the journalist could go, what's your favorite food? And the person would go, well, most people would say something like, I just really like pad thai. But my favorite food is, in fact, orange chicken. And then what they'll do is they'll remove the front and the back so that you only hear the person say that they like pad thai. That's how they manipulate. They do it all the time. You think it's a joke, you think it's a meme. It's not. That's why we need real, raw, conversations and podcasts. That's why I don't like doing digital interviews for Timcast IRL, because I want it in person and raw, live, right there. None of this digital stuff that could be who knows what. Look, I don't know how much I care about this, to be completely honest. But look, I see stories. If I want to talk about it, I talk about it. This one I thought was interesting because Tucker said it was fentanyl, and I disagreed. But I also disagree with the woke mob trying to get him banned. And I'm also worried about Project Veritas being banned. That's disastrous. So you can decide for yourself what you think. I'll leave it there. Next segment is coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. We will be having a live conversation on cultural, social, and political issues. We're going to have an awesome guest, by the way, so make sure you check it out, and I will see you all then.